welcome back to the Creator Shelf, and you're joining me on a warm, bright, sunny day in Brussels. So yeah, it's been kind of like that time where I just thought I would do a September favorites. I've seen a lot of it trending, and yeah, it's just a good way for me to sum up some of the things and the items and the books and tarot decks that I've been using in September. So there's kind of like three categories. One is books and decks for study. The other is decks that I've just basically enjoyed, and then finally there's also an area that I've been kind of like working through and the decks that I use currently around that area. So first and foremost, in terms of tarot, well, it's not going to be tarot and oracle, it's tarot study, is basically this book. It's a gem. It's 36 Secrets by Susan Chang, and I absolutely love this book. It's basically a journey through all of the suits, the minors, from 2 to 10, and looking at their corresponding constellations and planetary aspects. So I come from an astrology background, and astrology and astronomy, Roman and Greek myths, and specifically history as well. So for me to pick this book up was really, really good, because there came a point where, if coming from that background, when I looked at the cards, when I looked at the Rider-Waite-Smith system, or the Thoth system, for example, or even Tarot de Marseille, at some point I was like hitting kind of like a curb, like it didn't make sense. And it was because I was kind of like just transplanting astrology, Western astrology, and more the modern aspects of Western astrology onto the tarot decks and the systems. And I kind of like realized that something wasn't clicking. And then this book was brought to my attention by Nina from Shuffle Tarot. So thank you so much, Nina. But I picked this up, and it kind of like just opened my mind to how they correspond actually. And Susan Chang does a fantastic walkthrough. Now, one thing to know is that this book does have personal interpretation and anecdotes and examples. But you know, with tarot and even with astrology, people ask me, how do you begin? It's kind of like you just have to put a stake in the ground and start somewhere, right? So I was just really grateful to have like the beginnings of those correspondences according to tarot, not according to my astrology mind, which sounds a bit strange, but basically if you imagine two ends of a road, it's not quite like this, but I'm just trying to do the symbols of it, the metaphor, sorry. And if you imagine like two areas coming together, instead of going from astrology to tarot, this book for me has been about going from tarot to astrology, which is interesting, right? It's kind of like the reverse image, and then realizing that tarot has a different way, in a way of corresponding. So yeah, it's been eye-opening and kind of like a relearning, and I really enjoyed it. The other book that I've used alongside it is Tarot Deciphered. Now, this is by Chang again, the same person, and by Mylene. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correct, or Meline. And I understand, yeah, so Meline is the person who did also the Mundi Tarot and the Rosetta Tarot. Neither one that I do, that I just don't have basically, but I understand that they are amazing decks. I'd love to get them at one point. But I dipped into this book quite frequently, and this book basically takes each and every card and will give you, so for example, 9 of Wands, it says Lord of Strength, here you go. It gives you all the corresponding aspects of it, for example, the astrology, the planets, the decan, and so forth. But what it also does is, and this is the bit that I find interesting, it then gives the depth of that card in terms of Kabbalah, and then it gives the understanding in terms of RWS and Thoth. So I found that really, really interesting. It kind of like is the correspondence between Kabbalah and the Golden Dawn system. And I really, really have enjoyed that, because it's, again, helping me to learn tarot in a new way. The one thing I've got to say about this book, which is really, really important, is if you're going to use this book, for me, what was helpful was I read the introductions, I read the first part, and then I didn't read all the way through it, because, I mean, yeah, we're looking at what, I'm going to give you a rough guide. Yeah, nearly 650 pages. So I'm not going to read through it in one go, but what I did was that when I was pulling cards and as I've been using them, I sometimes would just go like, I wonder what Tarot Deciphered says. And I'd go and look into it. some things to know. If you're going to use this book, I would really recommend making sure you have an RWS. You also have a Thoth. And the reason why I really recommend that is because what I didn't understand until now is that Thoth images are under a license where it's not easy to basically reproduce them in a book. I think it requires a lot of well, what I understand is basically it's near impossible to get the rights to reproduce a Thoth image inside a book. So that is why we don't get the images inside the book, and therefore having a deck I think is really helpful. My copy is not the special greenies, it's just the US Games slash, this is not AGM, this is US Games, but AGM sells this deck as well. But yeah, mine is just a standard copy, but I just needed something where I actually had access to the images. So yeah, so this has been really good, and I think together these have been really good books for me to just have on my shelf to dip into. And I especially love this one, so I'm so grateful that I've managed to get a copy of this. It's well worth having, and especially if you're interested in the symbols and the planetary aspects and then the card, because for me that's like a huge element of like tarot, where if I'm not seeing that and I'm going just on like a picture, it's great, or like a painting, it's great, but yeah, this is kind of like the bones or the skeletal bones of practice, which I do need actually. So yeah, so that's like the books that I've used to study, and of course the decks that I used when I was kind of like looking and kind of like reading is, of course, I've just shown you the RWS and the Thoth, and sometimes it's good also to use the Morgan Greer. It doesn't always have all the symbols, but it's good to have Morgan Greer with me as well. So yeah, those were kind of like more tarot study items. The next category is tarot again, but I don't want to show all the decks that I picked up last month because I think you've all seen them now, but I'm just going to show like what I call kind of like the surprise buy, or the buy that kind of like has surprised me in terms of how much I liked it. And of course I've already shown it a lot now, but it's Tarot del Fuego by Ricardo Cavolo. I think you've already seen quite a few of the cards that I've flicked through, but this was the buy that kind of like made me really smile. And yeah, so I won't show too many of the images because I think I've just shown them already quite a bit on this channel, but yeah, it's just full of color and it's full of imagery, and it, as somebody said, it feels a bit, the eyes feel a bit disorienting because there's so many eyes sometimes in one card. Trying to find with, yeah, like some of them like really like are a little bit disorienting, but yeah, I really love this deck, and it's kind of like the deck where I have to sit there and really kind of like think, well, what is going on here? And Mr. Carrot Legs again, but there you go. So yeah, you see this one full of eyes and just disorienting. But yeah, it's a deck that I love, and you can get it on Amazon very easily, or Book Depository. It's a mass market deck published by Funia, which is, as I understand, some kind of a subsidiary of Lo Scarabeo or Llewellyn. I don't know how to put it, but they're basically linked to Lo Scarabeo, as I understand. So yeah, I'm looking at the back at the copyright, sorry, so that's why I was like, my mind went into there. But yes, so that's the Tarot del Fuego. The deck that I went through last month as my deck review is the Everyday Witch. Now, some of you have this already, but I just wanted to show it again. It's a large Llewellyn box deck. Art by Elizabeth Alba, written by Deborah Blake. What can I say? Now, since I've done the review, I've had a few more thoughts on this. It comes with a fully expansive guidebook. And I think the way I described in my review, as I recall, was something to do with it being kind of like a friend. And I stand by that. And most of all, I think the the next topic I'm going to go on to, but it's kind of like related to this, is that August and September have been challenging months, and in terms of doing some inner work. And I'm somebody that when I do inner work, I think it's always good to have a balance. For me, it's really important. And this deck has been exactly what I needed in September. I've described it as kind of like that period in my life, pre-puberty, post-puberty, like, that age from like 9 or 10 all the way into like our early teens or mid-teens, where having a friend can be quite difficult, or having that confidant is really, really difficult. And I found this deck to be a little bit like that. She's filled that gap where I needed that, and I've really, really loved her for it. It's a deck that I feel like I want to go back to, and it's kind of like, oh no, now we're doing another review. So that's the power of a deck. A comment I made in my review is that it is very young centric. So perhaps it might be putting off for somebody who I'm reading from another generation. And I got a comment back saying, hey, I'm from another generation. I would love to have it. So you see, I get good feedback where I've got presumptions, and people are like, no, I want to use that. So I think it's just wonderful. I think it's a wonderful deck if it appeals to a broad range of people. There is a lack of skin tone variation, which again I pick up on. I mean, Llewellyn really needs to hear that. I think sometimes it's like, please, like that. And I think in terms of body shapes and abilities and that so forth, it needs a little bit of shake up. I mean, it is meant to be very modern in some ways, and called the everyday witch, and sometimes I'm just like, yes, but modern in whose eyes or whose territory, basically. So those are the things where I still feel there's a bit of a drawback, or quite a drawback. But it just really depends on the vibe and whether or not it feels right for someone. So I'm going to just leave it open at that. I found her to be a gentle, lovely friend. Sometimes she tells the truth, for sure, but in a way which is approachable rather than scary. And I think that's really helpful. So if not anything, I find this deck has supportive aspects and then constructive criticism aspects. So I'm always just growing from it. That's the best way I can put it. The bit that I absolutely really, really loved in this deck, in this production, is the guidebook. And something that I missed on saying when I did the original review is not only does the guidebook have like a full color kind of like image, but at the bottom it has a caption. And for example, here for the devil, it has this caption. It says, "The devil you know isn't necessarily better than the one you don't." So it says the devil you know isn't necessarily better than the one you don't, which I really like those captions. And then we'll give you a little bit more. It says here, the devil made you do it? I don't think so. So really then it beckons the question, like, why did I do it, basically? And it goes back to, our own habits and patterns. Or, for example, let me take a minor, 10 of Cups. And it says, the end of the rainbow is right here. So all the things that we're looking for, that love, that feeling of companionship, that feeling of coming together, of belonging, it's right here. And then it says, joy is found not in the things, but in people. Life overflows with prosperity of the heart. That's what it says there as a caption. And I hadn't mentioned that in my original review, but looking back at my own journal notes, I realized how helpful that was for me. So I just want to add something in, about this deck that it just is so, it's very good at being, I think, beginner friendly, and I really think it would be a great deck, I think, for whether you're seasoned or not. But I loved it. Here, the star card, it says, we are the light of the stars, and it says the star, the cosmos is also within us. We are made of star stuff. Carl Sagan. I mean, yeah, I think, I got the Eight of Wands a few times in this deck and I loved it since things are really happening now. It really captures that spirit of like change and movement and then it says below here, it says there are moments when things come together and take on a life of their own, creating a momentum that's hard to stop. This may be one of those moments. And finally, the one thing I think that I didn't, maybe I mentioned it or not in my review, but looking back on this deck, I really, really loved the expression on the cat's face. Why am I showing just the guidebook? I just show you by the cards. But I really, really loved at times the expression on the cat's face. It kind of like sometimes summed up the feeling of the human, actually. I don't know how else to put it. Like, I'll show you a good one. Like like when you look at this, the Six of Cups, you just see that cat wants to play too, and it wants to be a part of it. That's for me nostalgia and wanting to belong and being a part of that kind of like that inner child moment. So yeah, or in this one, all these cats also having fun. I mean, just I think that's one of the things that's why I love this deck. And as you know, I have a little fairy beast of my own. So yeah, this deck is still holding a very special place in my heart. And yeah, I mean, I will definitely buy the mini because it's worth it for me, if not just to carry it around basically, because it's such a beautiful energy. I mean, yeah, this is about coming together, and the best bit is even the cat's involved in it, like just gorgeous deck. So yeah, so that is the Everyday Witch, and that was my deck review for September, and I use this every day. So just so you're aware that my deck reviews for the month mean that I actually need to pull from the deck every day in order to really just make that authentic connection for me. So 17 minutes in, the final take is what I've also been working on in September, beyond my everyday life, basically. And this is more of a sensitive topic, so just please take it with a huge heap of salt. It may or may not be helpful or relevant to everyone. But that is looking at some things to do with our inner self. Some people call it the inner child. Some people label it, if you're an Eckhart Tolle fan, he calls it the pain body. I mean, let me get a Tolle book out because, of course, he's always with me. He calls it This is Stillness Speaks. He calls it the pain body. He's also, of course, done his most famous book is The Power of Now, which I've read about 7 times. I reread it every few years. But there are different ways to label it. I don't also like calling it too much the shadow self, because there is this link in tarot, I get the feeling, between the shadow and a certain time of year. And I have to say that I face some challenges on a bright sunny day in the middle of May, when it's summer or something. So I hardly think that I'm going to leave all of my inner work to 1 month of the year or whatever. So I just want to be clear that, I sometimes dip into these things much more frequently. And I have been working on, well, not just working through, I don't want to say it that way, but I've been dipping in and out of a book called Homecoming. I urge caution if you are interested in this area to treat this book with just, take your time and don't push yourself through it. That's what I'm going to be very careful about. And then I also had a copy of The Body Keeps the Score, but I have to say that I've struggled a little bit because I'm hearing a certain voice or a tone, and I think I need to venture into books which are also written from a female point of view. That's the best way I'm going to put it. But this book and the area around it, and I don't want to go into it too much, is quite heavy. And it takes time to work through, and it takes an energy. And the best way I can describe it is that sometimes it's like going through treacle, and you're just kind of like, that's heavy. So to balance that, and that's why I want to come back to this in this video, is if anybody's working through this stuff and you know what I'm talking about, or you have experience of it, what's helped me is to balance it with decks and areas which are comforting and homely, and I'm struggling because a lot of the decks which have like a childlike aspect. For example, I think it's called the Inner Child cards by Isha Lerner, and those cards, a lot of them, they just don't have a diversity, and I think that at this point that I would really welcome that in those kind of areas and topics. Strangely, the Everyday Witch was fine to use, and I have no idea why I've struggled in that way. But I decided to just go back to some of my old favorites because they felt more comforting. So one of them is The Map by Colette Baron Reid. She speaks a language that some of us might know and are familiar with, and I find this deck just really good. Now, this is a copy that somebody gifted to me, so I'm so lucky that they did. I think that's like a cosmic thing, obviously, that I was gifted this copy and I use it. And I really, really love this deck because it's just so gentle for me. And it does have kind of like, a sharpness, it does kind of like call us out kind of thing, or call me out and say it's time for you to do things about it, or, are you hiding from something, or is there a lack of appreciation that needs to have more gratitude? It has all those messages in there. Or, frozen with fear, or, just, this one's called, what's it called here? Heal the Ouch, it's about looking at pain. But I really like it because I love the images, and I've put this like in my altar space, just like a card every few days. And it's just been nice. Yeah, so I just want to like mention that if you are doing any of that really tough stuff, I went back to like stuff that I found soothing, and I think I needed that. So that's one example. Another deck that I used, and this one is also is because it's CBR again, it's Colette Baron Reid, is the Goddess Power, and I wanted something with a feminine voice, and I'm not seeing enough of that. I don't know what it is. I'm very, very picky about goddess cards, and even these ones, some people like, cultural appropriation. I understand. I mean, that thread is running through nearly everything these days. But this one, I think it's because it has human figures, because it's photo collage basically, or however you want to put it. And I think I needed some human looking people on it, even though they've been completely digitally altered, whatever, however you want to put it. But what I'm trying to say, sorry, is I didn't want the kind of graphics which were cartoony, which is no disrespect to that, but for some reason I don't know why it's not clicking right now in my mind. So I just have used this. I don't think it's one of her best decks, really honestly put. I don't think it is, but I like it still. I think it's just going along that line of kind of like having positive vibes sometimes just to look at in the meantime. And then finally, I sometimes couple these pulls. So altar space might look like fun these days, but I couple it with this one, which is Super Attractor by Gabrielle Bernstein. I really like this deck, even though at first when I bought it, I didn't understand why I bought it. I mean, I get the meaning of their affirmations and so forth, and I know of her books, and I know where she's writing from, the space she's writing from. But yeah, this was one of those buys that was kind of like on a whim. But I have liked the cards, and I have to say that aesthetically, they go really, really well with some of the Hay House decks. So, if you're wondering of how to pair this particular deck, it goes well with a lot of the Hay House stuff. And I really like it because of the colors and the vibrancy. So more than anything, like sometimes I would read the message. Sometimes I've had one card from this deck sitting on my space for about 2 weeks, and that's fine. Like, I don't need to always be pulling card after card after card. It's like, it's fine to have the same message there because it's working and it's what I need basically. So yeah, I really like this deck. I'm really glad I got it, and I think it's worth investing in, and I might pick up one of her other decks soon at some point, just for like a shake up. But yeah, that's the Gabrielle Bernstein Super Attractor. I know she's also done The Universe Has Your Back, and she's done Spirit Junkie. So Hay House decks that are well worth looking for. So yeah, so these, I think, is that everything? Yeah, that's everything. are decks and books that I've been looking at in the last month, basically. You know, and just one thing to say, you know, that like I might not have like 20 things to show, but I think it's just because I'm one of those people that really likes to go into something and sit with it and let it percolate. Basically, it's just how I work. You know, there was a book that I wanted to show. I might just show you now, and it's basically mythology, timeless tales of gods and heroes. I should say gods and goddesses, I think, but basically, yeah, it's a great kind of like encyclopedia, not encyclopedia, but yeah, it's sometimes it has these full cover images. You know, this is Jupiter, and then it will give like, you know, it's whiting out here so you can't see it too well, but then basically it will talk about the gods with the Roman name and the Greek name, something that I really need. It covers, yes, it covers Roman/Greek gods and then Norse mythology as well. But I like to dip into this, and the reason why I like to dip into this, and I thought maybe I'll just show it anyway, is this is my bread and butter reading since I was like about 4 years old. This is the stuff that I basically, yeah, just ate every day. And the reason why I like books like these, I mean, there's quite a few kind of like encyclopedia type kind of like books around these days, but the reason, as you hear, it has a whole chapter on the Trojan War, is that when I'm reading something like, you know, the Symbols or the Chang book, the 36 Secrets, or Tarot Deciphered, sometimes it will speak about, you know, a god or a goddess or a myth, and I want to actually go back and read it from the historical or the mythological perspective. And I think for me, that's just kind of like the duality that I work with. So I hope that makes sense, but just some food for thought. Hopefully it might work for someone or help someone. And I will see you all either mid next week or next week. So take care and have a great rest of your weekend.